I'm Evan Smith. I'm the CEO of the Texas Tribune, and we're very pleased to be presenting today's day-long preview of the 86th legislative session. This is the third such preview that we have put on, always at the end of November, always running up to a new session. And this election season, as we've talked about, and we will talk about again in a moment, has made this run-up the most interesting of all. And there's a lot to talk about. And our next discussion is about maybe the most interesting aspect of this next session, and that is the new speaker. We do not have a new speaker yet, officially, but we sort of do, right? Barring something unforeseen, Dennis Bonnen, the Angleton Republican who chairs the all-important House Ways and Means Committee and serves as the Chamber's Speaker pro tem, will take the gavel from Joe Strauss and occupy the most powerful office in Texas not popularly elected. Given the drama that many of us in the press hoped for between the end of the election season and the start of the 86th session, the outcome of the first open speaker's race in 25 years is a bit of an anticlimax. As I said, we were hoping for Ali Frazier and we got Cooney Norton. It was over very fast. Chairman Bonnen calmly and quickly, within a few days of Election Day, cleared the field by locking up many more than the 76 votes necessary to claim the championship belt. He has only two more hurdles to clear, and both are formalities. A December 1st vote, that would be Saturday, right?
That's correct.
Of the House Republican caucus, ratifying him as their choice, and then a vote of the full House on January the 8th. So now the question turns to what kind of speaker he'll be and what will the House he leads do. To provide answers, we've convened a panel of House members on the presumptive speaker's team, by which I mean they have signed the letter indicating their support of this speaker, and in some cases have done more than that. They are two Republicans and one Democrat I'll refer to over their certain objections as Bonnen whisperers. As much as anyone, they're primed to help us understand and anticipate the likeliest byproducts of the new administration. Mary González, Democrat of Clint, was chosen by the voters of House District 75 to represent them in 2012. In fact, they're all class of 2012, I think, right? Everybody on this stage. In the 85th legislative session, she is vice chair of the Agriculture and Livestock Committee, sits on the Appropriations Committee. She was raised in Clint. She has an undergraduate degree from the University of Texas at Austin, a master's degree from St. Edward's University, not incidentally the new speaker's alma mater, and is pursuing her PhD at UT Austin, which she tells me will be concluded before the end of the year.
I will graduate during session. You
will graduate during session. Dr. González, during session. She is a... Mary González, D. Slacker, obviously. Jeff Leach, Republican of Plano, is in his third term representing District 67. This session, he's vice chair of the Urban Affairs Committee, and he sits on the Economic and Small Business Development Committee. He is a native of Plano. He has an undergraduate degree from Baylor University and a law degree from Southern Methodist University. Finally, Drew Springer, Republican of Muenster, elected in 2012 to represent District 68. In the 85th, he is vice chair of the County Affairs Committee. Representative Leach pointed out we have the vice chairs of Urban Affairs, County Affairs, and Ag and Livestock, and having them together on stage is a feat. Representative Springer was also a member of the Ways and Means and Redistricting Committees. He was born in Oklahoma, for which we forgive him, but not on Saturday.
So true, so true.
Right. May I say on behalf of the assembled group, Representative Springer, OU sucks. He was raised, however, in Weatherford, which is redemption of a sort, and he is a graduate of the University of North Texas. Please give these three a big hand. Happy to have them here. So we like to say, I mean, we in journalism and we royally like to say at election time that every presidential election in particular is about the next 4 years to 8 years ostensibly, but it's really about the last 4 years to 8 years. So before we talk about Speaker Bonnen, I'm going to ask you to talk about Speaker Strauss. Mr. Springer, is there a problem you're trying to solve? Is there a problem you need to solve?
No, I mean, I thought I was very well treated under Joe. In Joe's leadership, we did pass 3 conservative budgets, but there are some things I think we want to see going forward that we have talked about, which is, you know, we want to see more member-driven. We want to be more see a broader breadth of the whole entire body in there, and I think that that's what we were looking for.
If I were the speaker, I would push back, Mr. Springer, and say, I told you at the beginning of my 5 terms as speaker that I run the House by the will of the members. You're suggesting that somehow the members don't have enough say in the byproducts of a session. That goes against what I said to you and told you would be my affect toward you all.
No, I mean, in the members do. I mean, we do those type of things, but there was also much more outside influence that I think that we would rather see most of the influence come from the 150 members that are inside the body, that are the elected officials that represent those 165,000 citizens, constituents of our district.
To the delight of Ms. González and Mr. Leach, I'm going to stay with you and push you on this. Who exactly is the outside influence you're referring to? Name names.
No,
You've been bugging me to have you at an event. Are you sorry?
I'm sorry.
You've been bugging me to have you at an event. Are you sorry that I invited you today?
I'm thinking that, I did 2 Trib talks now in the last 2 months. Maybe the third one was not the lucky charm. No.
Apparently not, yeah. No, seriously, who are you talking about?
We're talking about consultants. We're talking about lobbyists. We're talking about staff. We want to see that we're dealing with members that are accountable to the members on the floor when each of us have our own legislation going forward.
So the problem, just in sum, is that the Speaker did not sufficiently protect you all and push back against outside influences that might seek to pollute the process.
Everybody has their own style. They have those people that they lean on. We want to see going forward that we're leaning on our other members to make sure everybody, all factions of the 150 are well represented. And I think Dennis is a good choice in that.
Ms. González, you had 55 Democrats in the last session. You had as many under Speaker Strauss as 74. Then you went down to 49, I believe, which was a significant departure from the previous session. Came back up. Did Democrats, whatever the number, feel well treated by Speaker Strauss? Did you have a problem to solve or something to fix?
Well, the problem to solve was that he retired, and we needed a new leader. And so I think the Democrats would have been happy to have Speaker Strauss come back again, of course. I think that we would have done some things differently, obviously. But I do think for the House in totality, a new change in leadership will be great.
What were the aspects of the Strauss speakership that you felt could be improved upon? Maybe let me ask it a slightly different way. So if you're identifying, if you're building the perfect beast going forward, based on your experience of the last 10 years, or in your case, the last fewer than 10 years, since you've been in fewer than 10 years, what aspects of the Strauss speakership would you be looking to improve on if you're building the perfect speaker?
For me, I love the legislature. I really respect my colleagues, even if they think differently than me. They sacrifice so much. They leave their families, their jobs. And so if we're going to sacrifice so much, I want to see outcomes, right? And I think specifically in the last 2 to 4 years, the House was really dominated by a culture of fear. And so my next speaker, and I think Chairman Bonnen will do this, is change the culture to be a culture of leadership, of courage, where the issues aren't determined by Republican primaries, but more by the needs of the state of Texas. And he's already done that when you can see him talk about school finance #1. And so for me, a rock star speaker is a speaker who changes the culture back to the way it used to be, that wasn't about party, that wasn't about anything but first the needs of Texas as a whole.
Mr. Leach, the movement conservatives in the Texas legislature, not all are members of the Freedom Caucus, although you were, and you consider yourself one of those folks, expressed over time dissatisfaction with the way the Speaker treated them and their legislative priorities. Did their bills get an adequate hearing? Did they get an up or down vote? Were they themselves given the opportunity to contribute in the way that non-movement conservative Republicans or non-Freedom Caucus Republicans contributed? Is that a fair characterization of the view of you and some of your colleagues with regard to the last speaker?
Well, I'm not going to attempt to speak today on behalf of any of my colleagues. I'll tell you my position, and I don't think it's any secret to you, Evan, that my relationship with Speaker Strauss, with Joe, has been a roller coaster. It's had its ups and downs. I respect him and Julie and their family immensely for their public service. Much good has come from his service. I mean, look, Texas is unique among the 50 states. We're in a stronger position than I think any other state, and Speaker Strauss has served as our speaker for the past 10 years.
So he gets credit, at least in part, for that. Do you agree with Mr. Springer that he passed conservative budgets session after session?
I think that conservative budgets passed under his leadership. I'll put it that way.
You're going to use the passive. They taught you the passive voice at Baylor. Is that what happened?
No. What I'll say is, and in 2013, I was extremely frustrated with the way the House was run, with how I felt conservatives were silenced and backbenched. That's not a feeling that I hold alone.
Yeah.
And then in 2015, you know that I delivered the nomination speech for Speaker Strauss's opponent, Scott Turner, my dear friend, since retired from Collin County. And then 2015, I thought was a great session. And so in 2017, this past legislative session, we came back. There was no speaker's race. We were all united in supporting Speaker Strauss. And
150 to nothing, right?
that's
Vote of
right.
acclamation.
But I don't think there's any disagreement among Republicans and Democrats. All of us can find some sense of very real, deep frustration after this past legislative session. I'm not placing all the blame on Speaker Strauss, but the House could have been operated better, could have been run better to better represent and advocate for the voice of Texans all across this state.
Mr. Springer, you were an early advocate for Chairman Bonnen as Speaker, correct?
Yes.
He got in the race late. You had Chairman Price, Chairman Darby, Chairman Zerwas. You had Chairman Parker. You had Phil King in that race. Eventually had Travis Clardy in that race. Clearly, you found the other people running for Speaker to be lacking in something or to be less attractive to you than Mr. Bonnen did. Can you tell us what about Mr. Bonnen scratched your itch as a Speaker candidate? Since you were, I mean, you are one of those who was earliest in promoting his candidacy and in gathering others to support it.
76.
He could get to 76 and they couldn't?
No, absolutely they couldn't. I think
It was a math problem.
I mean, we had people running that were good friends, great candidates that were not getting traction to get people to get behind them. And a group of us got together and we says, you know, who do we think that represents us to let members run the legislature that we think can win, that can bring parties together, not only within the Republican Party, but we wanted somebody who would also work with Democrats. As I said in Abilene at the Trip Talk out there, I said we would not select in Republican caucus a speaker that would not show that they could work with Democrats.
Now, there's probably a limit to that, Mr. Springer. There are Democrats who will tell you that the Democrats would have been happy to attach themselves to Price or attach themselves to John Zerwas, and it's possible that one of those folks could have been elected with a handful of Republicans, 60-odd Democrats, and gotten to that 76 that you called out. But you wouldn't have liked it if the next speaker had been elected with a majority of with Democrats, not Republicans.
That's exactly right. I mean,
so it wasn't just getting to 76, but it had to be the right 76.
It had to be the right 76, and we wanted to see, once again, somebody that can let the whole House work, and that means you are going to work with both parties.
Yeah. Ms. González, you were part of the group that broke away from the 67 Democrats to sign on with Mr. Bonnen.
I think it's more complex than that.
Well, I'm all about shorthanding. We only have an hour. But basically, when Mr. Bonnen came out with his list of 109, there were 30 Democrats on it, of which you were one. Why did you decide he was the right choice for you? You had a Democrat who was running for Speaker, as unrealistic as
But the Democrat was also on the list.
Was not going to win. I know that, but he was also unrealistic as the likely winner in this kind of House. But you had other candidates running for Speaker. Why was he somebody who you were willing to sign on with?
I think it's a combination of what Drew said. There was a 76 number, there was the reality. But for me, I live in a district, I have 263 colonias in my district. There are people in my district that can't flush their toilets, don't have clean water. Like, I don't leave my hometown of Clint, Texas to come up here and not work. I work very hard, as most of you in this room know, to really fight for the needs of my constituents. As the landscape started to change, I saw that Speaker Bonnen, Chairman Bonnen, was really making the moves to bring together Democrats and Republicans. And for me, who wants to change the conditions of my district, it just seemed like I would rather be part of the circle, talking about these issues that sometimes get ignored, than outside of the circle. And I've been really proud. I mean, look at what he did. He created a bipartisan committee to select the new parliamentarian. That is new, different, and actions speak louder than words in this case.
And so there was a pragmatism to your decision. If the train's leaving the station, as we've said a couple times today, better to be on it than left on the platform.
Fair,
right?
but I think it was more than pragmatism.
But you and Mr. Bonnen don't agree on a lot of core issues, correct?
Me and Drew Springer and Jeff Leach don't agree on a lot of core issues.
Yes, but as far as I know, you were not thinking of supporting either of them for Speaker. The fact is,
maybe.
you might agree with Joe Strauss more on issues than you did with Mr. Bonnen.
Here's what I do agree with. I agree that school finance should be the thing we get done next session.
Right.
I agree that that the speaker should be elected in a bipartisan fashion. I believe that we should have a fair process in the legislature so that all our bills get heard and members' issues are put forward. All of that was things that Speaker Bonnen was talking about. Was it pragmatic? Yes. But it was also because he was saying things that I needed to hear in this moment. I think the House needs courage. I think that the House needs authenticity. I think the House needs to work on real issues, and he was talking about those things.
Did he make any assurances to you, Ms. González, about Democratic committee chairs?
No.
And a proportion of the House being, a proportion of the chairmanships being doled out to Democrats based on their proportion in the legislature?
Not specifically to me, but here's what he did say. He did say that Democrats would be part of the conversation.
Will they be part of the leadership?
I did not ask that question.
Mr. Springer, do you have any problem if Democrats are part of the leadership?
No,
Yeah,
absolutely
true
not. And I know that Dennis came out and said that well before.
Yes.
When there was probably only less than 50 Republicans already on had already said that he would commit to that. And I'd said that same comment in Abilene. Absolutely, and it's one of the things that I think that makes Texas work well. And I've said it in all my town halls. I work probably the closest with Poncho Navarez. He has 35,000 square miles. I have 25,000 combined. We almost represent a quarter of the state of Texas. That's 90% of the things we pass affect rural. And Mary and I work together hugely on those in ag and livestock. And so, they have done a fantastic job. I think Tracy King's done a great job when I was in ag and livestock under him.
Mr. Leach, do you see any reason why Democrats should expect to be treated differently under Mr. Bonnen than under Mr. Strauss in terms of leadership, committee chairs, and all that kind of stuff? Are you good with what the plan seems to be here?
Absolutely. Mary González should be able to represent her district as vigorously and passionately as Jeff Leach is able to represent his.
Right.
And I don't know a single conservative, I'm sure there are some out there, but the conservatives I know, both in the House and the leaders statewide out of the House, believe very strongly that we should fight like hell to make sure that Mary González can passionately represent her district, not only in committee or in the back rooms, but on the floor of the Texas House of Representatives. Yeah. And that is the role of the speaker, is to serve the members, to ensure that they're able to effectively be the voice of and the advocate for the constituents that elected them. And so if I get any sense next session, I don't believe this will happen because Representative Bonnen, I think, has said this won't happen, that if there's any sense next session that Mary González is being kept from representing her district, and I'm using you as an example, or being silenced or backbenched, or punished in any form or fashion, then we'll have a fight on our hands. One of the reasons I'm so excited to support Dennis Bonnen is because I don't believe, very strongly don't believe, that that's going to happen under his leadership.
You think he'll be fair to everybody?
I absolutely do.
So I asked Ms. González about the Democrats making an accommodation or making peace with the idea of Mr. Bonnen as speaker. You come from the other side, in theory, or you and many of your colleagues in the Freedom Caucus might have likewise viewed Mr. Bonnen with skepticism. I've described you as the ambassador to Freedom Caucustan of the Bonnen administration because you were an early supporter of Mr. Bonnen's, and you also worked hard to get other members of the Freedom Caucus to sign on. It wasn't entirely clear that would happen, but you were successful in getting, I believe, all but one or two to join with you all. So what is it from the conservative side that made you comfortable with Mr. Bonnen? I've asked Ms. González to talk to us from her side. Tell us from your side.
From my side, I've served with Dennis for 3 sessions now, and Dennis and I don't agree on everything. And you know what? That's okay. That's actually really reassuring because there's 150 strong voices on the floor of the Texas House, and on any number of issues there might be disagreement. But Representative Bonnen, I care a lot about process, Evan. And in this business, on the floor of the Texas House and the Senate and in the Capitol building, which is your building, by the way, it's your house, not ours, trust is the coin of the realm. And I want a leader in the Texas House that I can trust. And with every bit of my being, I trust Dennis Bonnen to says what he's going to do and to do what he says he's going to do.
Right. Mr. Springer, one of the things about presumptive Speaker Bonnen that has been commented on a lot is his personality. This is a guy that doesn't take crap.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Was that part of the calculation here, that given the way that the House and the Senate interacted last session, that the House needed somebody who could stand up to Dan Patrick? Let me just come out and say it. Is that part of what the calculation was here?
That is definitely a piece of it, is we wanted somebody that stood up for the House that says, we're not going to be run over. We're going to be able to represent our constituents, and sometimes at our pace, and because of the structures, those two don't always align the same way. But while you can say stand up, I can also say stand up, and also how can we work better together? How can we have more joint committees that actually produce something in the interim that when we come back in session, and I think that's obviously looking forward to the 87th, that we do from that aspect. But yes, we want somebody who is going to say, look, if there's a senator over there that is attacking a Jeff Leach or a Mary González bill or a Diego Bernal, that we're going to sit here and say, we're not going to take that. We're that's not the way we're going to be treated. Right. Now, if it's a bad bill, debate it on the floor and kill it in the Senate. And the same should go with the House. I would think Dan Patrick would expect the same thing from us.
So the relationship between the House and the Senate is a factor in considering who might be Speaker, and specifically in the case of Mr. Bonnen.
It was definitely one. And you talked about Dennis, and I've had the pleasure of serving 2 sessions with him as my chairman of Ways and Means. And I can tell you there's very few people that have ever left that committee hearing not knowing exactly where they stood with Dennis.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed it. I've been
that may be the understatement of the century. Right.
I've had Dennis question a few of my comments to only turn around 10 minutes later and said that on a different issue, hey, that's a fantastic idea. We need to make sure that's there.
Right.
So once you made a mistake, he pointed out where he thought you made a mistake. You could continue to debate it if you wanted to.
Right.
But then he moves on to the next thing and how we can make Texas better.
Yeah. Ms. González, one of the things I heard from Democrats in the initial wave of Bonnen mania was, he voted for the Schaefer amendment to SB 4, and when the Democrats were deliberating about whether to pull down amendments and try to get a better deal and maybe the Schaefer amendment goes away, it was Chairman Bonnen who was dispatched to tell the Democrats time's up, deal's off, and there were some hard feelings about that. I mean, there have been moments where that Bonnen forthrightness has been perceived by some in your party, as expressed to me and others, as a bug and not a feature. Will you talk about his disposition and the degree to which his disposition is either a positive or a negative from your perspective?
So, Evan, let me tell you a little fact. Speaker races are really complex. And, when I talk about voting or voters, I really get really frustrated in Texas when voters are one-issue voters, right? And so while the Schaefer Amendment, for example, and a lot of people know this, was really heartbreaking for me. A lot of you saw me cry on the House floor over it. It was, for me, very dangerous to the state of Texas. It wasn't also the only issue that we have to deal with here. We have to deal with school finance, and we have to deal with clean water, and we have to deal with a lot of other issues. And so, so did we and Speaker Bonnen agree on that issue? No. Do I think that there are some other issues that we do agree on? Yes, specifically school finance. But when we're talking about disposition, here's what the last election showed us. The last election showed us that voters want authenticity and courage when it comes to elections. Like, look how many voters came out just because they were hearing some raw voices. And so what Speaker Bonnen, while it might be a little bit rough around the edges, kind of like me, I'm a little scrappy, he is also super authentic. You don't have to question where you stand. You know the truth. And right now, in this moment in time, when the House is healing from SB 4, we need to know truth and courage and authenticity.
Yeah, Mr. Leach, same. You feel the same way that but one of the byproducts of the election is that he's the right guy for now, given the message that you all heard about, no BS. Let's just get to work and talk honest to one another and move on.
Yes, and going back to your question about the House and the Senate, Dennis Bonnen will not miss a breakfast with Dan Patrick and Greg Abbott. The fact that last session those communications were cut off completely, in fact, I think it's understood among all the members that Dennis Bonnen, when Speaker Strauss was either unwilling or didn't want to go for whatever reason or wasn't available to go talk to Senator Patrick, he sent Dennis Bonnen. And that excites me. I think that the House and the Senate have got to come together next session. We've got big challenges, and if we don't come together, then our constituents are the ones who are going to.
Do you take, Mr. Leach, do you take Mr. Bonnen at his word when he's said in these early moments as the speaker presumptive that public education is job number one for this House and that that's where he wants the focus of members to be?
No question.
So we've heard that in previous sessions from speakers. Why should we believe him? This is said with no disrespect to him, but we've been told before public education is a priority, only to get to the end of a session and discover, not so much. So why should we believe it this time?
Because we had a pretty, as Republicans, we had a pretty loud, abrasive wake-up call 3 weeks ago. Yeah. And he's hearing and seeking.
Tell me more on that.
Seeking. He is not just hearing. There's a difference between hearing the voices of your legislators, your members, and actively seeking the input of your legislators, the House members. Dennis Bonnen is actively seeking the input from all 149 members of the Texas House, and he is hearing that public education in all our communities, all across this state, including my own, is the number one issue. Right. I've toured. Over the past year, I have been to nearly 50 public schools, every public school campus in my district. Right. I know Representative Bernal has done the same in his district. In fact, I got the idea from him and Representative Goldman. And look, I don't think there's any disagreement here that public education and property tax reform, which goes hand in hand with that, are the top issues next session.
Right, but Mr. Leach, I remember, because I remember these kinds of things, not normal stuff, but details, that you were the only member of the Freedom Caucus to back Mr. Huberty's bill to put more money into public education in the House last time. Am I correct about that?
I was.
You were. There are members of the Freedom Caucus who were reelected who may not have the same view of public education as the number one issue that you do. Is there going to be unanimity about this? It's going to take unanimity for this issue to really remain at the top of the agenda.
Those members, whether they're in the Freedom Caucus or outside of it, need to do what other members have done and actually go into our public schools.
You think they're not doing that?
I'm not saying they're not doing that. In fact, I know members in the Freedom Caucus that are doing that, and I commend them for that. But if you are don't believe that public education is important and is one of the key, if not the keys, to the future of this state, then I think you're missing the boat. We have incredible teachers across this state who are pouring their hearts, their souls, their lives, spending more time with kids who are not their own than their own kids at home, and we have an obligation to support them. Now, the answer, that's easy to say here. What the actual solution is more of a complex and complicated discussion, but there's no question that public education has got to be the centerpiece of our agenda next session, and I think it will be.
Ms. González, and Democrats take the Speaker presumptive at his word.
And Evan, if I could let me say, I do believe in my conversations with other Freedom Caucus members in the House that there is large-scale, broad agreement on that issue. Yes.
Subject. Democrats feel like they can take him at his word that this is the priority?
Yes, and I think to Speaker Strauss's credit, I do think he really did try to get school finance with Jimmy Don Aycock or with Chairman Huberty across the finish line. I mean, the battles between the House and the Senate really did break down the efforts for school finance and other public school reforms. But and this is why Chairman Bonnen's administration will be different, right? Because I think if he's coming to the table and talking to the lieutenant governor and talking to the governor, then we're more likely to maybe actually see the results that we want in school finance. You know,
that's it's a rosy view, and I love rosy views of the world, Mr. Springer, but the non-rosy view is that we're in definition of insanity territory. What's going to be different next time? Is the Senate not going to behave as the Senate did? Senate's got a Senate.
No,
and so whatever it is, whether it's Chairman Huberty or anybody else who leads this effort, Vice Chair Bernal or anybody else who leads this effort, it's going to ultimately come down to whether the House and the Senate can come to common purpose on this. And are you more optimistic with a Dennis Bonnen in the chair than you would otherwise be that common purpose can be arrived at?
You know, I think that whoever we were going to elect to be Speaker was going to get to this stage. And it's because the public has spoken. And Jeff said during the elections, and I think that was just the icing on the cake, if you had been doing all the town halls and talking to all the people I had throughout my district, a rural conservative district, you knew that this was an issue. It was immensely higher than when I ran in 2012 as an issue. And so timing was a big portion of that as well. And I think the timing, I travel and I do many town halls with Charles Perry, also with Pat Fallon. I know those guys are hearing and seeing the same things. I know that they want to work to make sure that these things and that
Individual
and that the
senators
citizens
may
are
be
happy.
telling the lieutenant governor the same thing that you're telling
I think
Speaker
exactly.
Presumptive Bonnen, that it's time to get on with this. Mr. Springer, you're a member of the Ways and Means Committee, as you said, last two
Yes.
sessions. I can't help but notice that committee is going to need a new chairman. Do you know anybody?
You know, there's
Maybe
a lot
an early backer of the speaker, possibly? Do you know anybody who might want to be
there's
chairman?
there's a lot of good members, and I'll say this, and yes, it was Jeff and myself and several others when we got together early.
Yeah.
It was never about, hey, we want to be the ones that kick this off so we can get all the cool stuff.
Peace.
Absolutely.
But you
no
know,
way
but you know how this,
whatsoever.
Mr. Springer, you know how this works.
I know how it works.
You did not just fall off a truck in Munster. I understand how this goes. So you know the tax issue by virtue of being a member of the Ways and Means Committee, and what Representative Leach just said is undeniably true. Property tax reform and education reform are linked. Last session, even with Chairman Bonnen in the lead, the House and the Senate could not come to any agreement on property tax reform. And then the governor came back and had a third plan. I mean, what are we going to do? This is going to come back. So what will a Bonnen-led House do on this issue, since he, too, knows that issue better than anybody?
Yeah, no, we have absolutely, as much as we've heard about education, we've heard about property tax relief and reform. Reform is what we worked on last session. We also have had a vote where it was 93% of my district voted for a 4% cap in the March primaries. And I can go down to Bell County that voted 94.78%. And I can run through all these that says, you know, the voters are saying, look, we want that final say because of where taxes are going. I absolutely think we need to reduce the M&O portion and have the state find other revenue sources that does a swap to be able to take care of that to get us at least to 50-50. And I think we're going to see appraisals go up, so I'd rather go below that.
So earlier today, we heard my colleague Ross Ramsey, and I don't think he was the only one, say that if you do what you just described and you swap out local property tax supporting education for more funding at the state level, what you're actually not doing is putting more money into public education.
And that is that it can be either or. And you're exactly right. You can do exactly the same thing and just reduce, have the state pick up a bigger portion of theirs and be able to do that.
Do you have a sense of what Mr. Bonnen is thinking on this issue? And would you share it with us
Absolutely.
right now, please?
Sure.
Yes. What's he thinking?
He is thinking that the members of the House are going to figure out that solution and put it forward.
Oh my God, you got me. Look, the school, Mr. Springer, the School Finance Commission, maybe Aaliyah Swaby will have better success with Bernal and Huberty getting them to tell you, but the School Finance Commission is about to do the big reveal on its thinking on this. You have a sense that Speaker Bonnen is going to embrace the School Finance Commission's findings and just say this is going to be the policy of the House? Any reason to think that?
You know, once again, I have not followed the commission's reports on theirs. You know, he is going to look for those leaders in the House, those who want to roll up their sleeve to come up with what those solutions should be. You know, I know from my conservative, when I talk to my constituents, they said, look, state and local is about $11,000 a kid, 20 kids a classroom, $220,000. How can we not pay a teacher over $75,000 and put a roof over their head? We are sitting here trying to figure out what are those solutions to come there. Have we put too much emphasis outside of the classroom?
Right.
Whether that's in other services that were traditionally done either at the home or through other agencies, or have we put too much on to athletics? We're going to have those conversations.
Last point before I go to Ms. González. It sounds to me like you are open to something akin to what was discussed at the end of last session, property tax reform that would involve a tripwire for local folks to say grace over any attempt to increase property taxes above a certain point, whether it's 6 or 4.
I do, and I think that it's got to be smart legislation, and I think that means there has to be carve-outs. There has to be things that aren't automatics, that don't just trip these up. That, you know, the counties and the cities have to continue to be able to run.
Right.
I have counties that if diesel fuel goes from $2 to $4, will see a 12% increase in their budget, just because that's the way of life in rural
Nature of your
frontier
district.
Texas.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And so, you know, we had, and I would say Dennis fought for rural Texas in those and had us put those amendments and those changes to the Senate bill when it came over.
Right. Ms. González, are you confident that under Speaker Bonnen that the property tax issue will be resolved, first of all, and second of all, resolved in a way that you can get behind?
I forgot my crystal ball today, Evan.
Oh, come on.
Look, here's what I do know. Here's what I do trust.
Yeah.
I trust that Speaker Bonnen is going to listen to all the members. I think that he's going to put people in leadership positions who are the experts in their areas, and it's not going to be based on just because a hierarchy that they should always be there, because they have been there. And I think that when you put the smartest people in the room, Republicans and Democrats, you get good outcomes. And so here's what I do trust. I trust it'll be a fair process.
Yep.
I trust that we'll be able to hear from members. And to be honest, if I'm brutally honest, I have no idea. But
Well, do you have an idea? Okay, if you don't have an idea what he thinks, do you have an idea what you think? Do you have an idea how you feel about this?
But here's where I do feel confident. I do feel confident that there's going to be a fair process, and in that alone is a huge shift. And I think that will encourage and empower members to really wrap around trying to get to a solution as opposed to just fighting solutions.
Right. Mr. Leach, I know your mayor, the mayor of Plano, he's a rock star among local electeds. He's not going to let you all constrain him in his ability to do what he needs to do to serve his constituents. So isn't he going to come back to you the same way that local elected officials came back to you the last time and said, watch out when you mess with this, you make it harder for us to do what we need to do for our folks?
Well, my hope would be that that my friend Mayor LaRoselier from Plano and every mayor from the thousands of Texas cities and every single county judge across this state would come to the legislature with an open mind and a willing heart to work collaboratively to find solutions for our constituents. If my mayor or any other mayor comes down and says this is what we want and anything less or more than this is not acceptable to us, well, that's not how the legislature works. We've got to work together to meet the needs of our constituents, and I think I can say with almost absolute certainty that all across this state, Republicans, Democrats, people of all political stripes, urban, rural, are calling out for property tax relief and for school finance reform. And so it's the legislature's responsibility to work collaboratively with our mayors and our city councils and county commissioners and county judges to find solutions, not to fight against each other, but to work together.
And Speaker Bonnen will listen to those folks in the same way that Speaker Strauss did, and the outcome will be the outcome.
I think it'll be differently than Speaker Strauss did. I do.
How's that?
Well, because I think personnel matters, as Drew and Mary were saying. Putting the right people on the right committees in the right leadership positions is important. A fresh wave of leadership in the Texas House, I think, will be good for us. And
well, the voters took care of that to some degree, right?
But let me put it, in 2015, there was a newly elected member, who was clearly antagonistic to the speaker from Dallas that was appointed to the Ag and Livestock Committee. This member doesn't have a single cow in his district, or horse, or farmer, or rancher. And it was clearly, he was put on that committee to punish him, to backbench him, to silence him. And that's wrong. That's wrong for a Democrat.
You think that will not happen under this speaker?
Yeah, I think it won't happen under this speaker. My hope is that it won't happen because that member was clearly elected by his constituents. He's skilled, he's talented, he's smart. He could have been used in another form or fashion and on another committee. And yeah, I think that's wrong. And we ought to call it like we see it.
Ms. González, Chairman Bonnen, among the other issues that he seems to know very well and has had a history of weighing in on specifically is border security.
My favorite topic.
You come from El Paso. You know border security up close and personal. You also know that often when people in the legislature are asked, where are you going to find the money to put into public education if you need to put more money into public ed and you're not willing to raise revenue, one of the first places they turn is the $800 million appropriation for border security that's occurred in 2 consecutive budgets. If the issue is legitimately a federal issue, then let's hand it off to the federal government. You and the speaker are going to be able to find, and Democrats and the speaker, common purpose on that issue, do you think? Where will he be on that issue?
I was fortunate enough to be on the Democratic committee to interview the speaker candidates. And one of the things I talked about to every candidate was, we live in a different time when it comes to immigration and border security. In my district, for those of you who don't know, is a Tornillo tent city. Right now, where there's 2,300 kids living in tents outside, right? This is a very serious and personal issue to my heart. I think we're the only country in the world that incarcerates children for immigration status. So I take this issue extremely passionately. We spend so much money when the federal government is doing so much already when this issue. Time and time again, we've spoken out against it. Here's what I do think. I think that, again, I'm not going to come up here and say that Speaker Bonnen's going to do all the democratic things we want him to do. What I do think is that he is going to let us, two things. He's going to let us try to rebuild this and maybe in a different way. But second, I don't think he's going to silence our voices. Here's one of the things that I'm excited about. I do think for the last 4 years, as vice chair of the Mexican American Legislative Caucus, our caucus has been positioned to only be the fighters. And I love being a fighter. But in some ways, it's dehumanizing to me as a legislator if my only role is to fight. Because I'm elected to also build, right? And so the difference is while I might not win this battle, but I'm going to try really hard, I also feel that I can build things for my district, and so that in itself will create a balance. Will we still fight on border security? Yes. Am I going to say he's going to fix it? I have no earthly clue. Do I have hope that do I know that I'm still going to fight it? Hell yeah. So I can't predict what's going to happen next session. All I can know is I'm going to fight it. I have faith he's going to listen, and we're hopefully going to come in the middle.
And being on his team doesn't remove the ability to fight him tooth and nail on an issue like that from your arsenal, right? You are absolutely prepared to fight with him, even if you're on his team now. Tomorrow's another day.
Evan, there are 2,000 kids living in tents in my district. If he can't understand that I'm going to fight for children, then
right.
Then no, I don't think anyone would fault me for fighting for my district, and I think he knows that.
Okay, we're going to take questions from you all in a moment here, so please line up at the mics. Let me ask each of you, Mr. Springer, Mr. Leach, Ms. González. We have not heard a ton from Mr. Bonnen about what he intends to do, and that's probably not that surprising. This is the time to talk to members of the House, get your ducks in a row, get the caucus vote over with, get the January 8th vote over with, and then presumably he'll be something of a public figure. Even at the end of his 10 years as Speaker, Speaker Strauss's name ID was pretty low out in the main. Likely that same will be the case for Speaker Bonnen, but he does have to emerge and talk a bit about his priorities. We know public education is something that he has identified as a core issue. I want each of you to tell me something else from your sense of him that we should be looking for as an issue in his administration. Springer, Leach, González. Mr. Springer.
I think where he is in this, and it's sort of that limbo time, the way we have things. You could be presumptuous. Yes, I've got 109 signatures. I've got this. Many others have probably already come over from this stage. And so he's saying, I want to be focused internally. I fully expect come January 9th through the next 2 years thereafter, Chairman Bonnen will be very accessible and public speaking. But once again, Chairman has said, what is important for the members? What do the members want to work on? In my conversations with Chairman, it's always been, what are the core functions of government? Are we going to do those right? That's education, that's transportation, that's infrastructure, that's security. We've got to do those and focus on those. And I feel the best, this one, which is, hey, we need to do those. We've heard that we've been off in the weeds dealing with other things that aren't as important because we have not done our bricks to be messing with the mortar.
So that sounds like a non-specific answer at first blush, which is fine, but actually I hear in it the germ of a specific answer. When you say that Speaker Bonnen is talking about core priorities, what that tells me is we're not likely to see legislation about bathroom access. We're not likely to see vouchers. We're not likely to see things that don't qualify as meat and potatoes issues that advance the ability of the state to be competitive in the 21st century.
We will have those conversations about all those items, pro-life, Second Amendment, all those different type of ones, but they are definitely not going to be anywhere near the top of the things we're going to be
You think that they'll
on.
be secondary? Well, that's actually quite a specific answer. You think they'll be secondary on the list of priorities?
Absolutely. I think if anybody has listened to their constituents over the last 3 months, they realize that they want us to focus and get these right. Let's get back to showing you can run the state and keep the state the best place it is.
Mr. Leach, you and your guys going to stand for that? If those types of issues are put in a timeout or put in a second tier, Freedom Caucus guys going to stand for that?
Be more specific.
Well, I heard. I mean, I'll attach myself to Mr. Springer's comments. If Second Amendment issues or issues related to life, reproductive health, what have you, are put in a second tier to things like education, infrastructure, workforce, and all that, which is what I think Mr. Springer is suggesting, will you and your folks in the Freedom Caucus stand for that?
Well, look, I don't think it's any secret, and I'm not going to try to create a smokescreen. I mean, the life issue is an incredibly important to me, and that's not just preborn babies. That's all the way from the womb to the tomb. Representative Springer led the bipartisan charge last session on the
Charlie's Law.
Yeah, Charlie's Law, which is a great piece of legislation relating to stem cell therapy and is saving lives. Those are issues that I think we need to focus on.
Yeah.
Second Amendment issues, I'm sure that will be an issue. School safety, I think, will be a huge issue. I was actually going to mention to your question, what issues are we not talking about that will be issues?
School safety?
I think there's two. School safety will be and should be a big issue, and also criminal justice reform.
Right.
Criminal justice reform right now, for all of the divisiveness and the fights in this country, one of the really great, cool things happening is Republicans and Democrats coming together on criminal justice reform.
It's a legitimately bipartisan issue.
It's an amazing
in an era without very many.
If you're looking for silver lining and hope in this country, where people from different parts of the political spectrum and different parts of the state can come together, criminal justice reform is your answer. Some really awesome things happening.
And your colleague, Mr. Krause, was in fact at the White House yesterday.
That's right. That's right.
On this issue, where the former head of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, Brooke Rollins, appears to be getting a bump up within the Trump administration, and possibly will have even greater purview over these types of issues, and that issue may even become more of a national issue that Texas aligns itself with.
That's right. And let me just say, as a pro-life conservative, I believe that criminal justice reform is and should be a pro-life issue, because right now the state of Texas is robbing life from Texans by keeping them behind bars because we're mad at them, when they could be restored and reformed and rejuvenated and could be productive, tax-paying citizens of this state. And we have an obligation, and I think a great opportunity in this state, to get these people back on their feet and to save their lives.
You sound like a chairman of criminal
Well,
jurisprudence,
no,
actually.
no. Representative Moody
I was
is
about
an
to say,
incredible...
Joe Moody might have something to say about that. Ms. González, say marijuana.
What?
Is it marijuana? Is marijuana your answer to something that we're not talking about that we should be talking about?
No, I'm going to say special education. Okay. I'm not going to say marijuana. So look, last month, the Fifth Court of Appeals came out and said that Texas had really messed up when it came to special education funding. We know that, and this has been an issue for years. And so yesterday, I talked to Chairman Bonnen, and I said, did you know, I'm the oldest of 11, my youngest sister has Down syndrome. And I'm very passionate about special education. And I told him a little bit about what was going on. He's like, we need to talk more about that. So I'm glad that he was really receptive to that. I think that this session will see some transformative changes when it comes to special education funding.
Good. Microphones are empty. Jump in. Love to have you join in the conversation. Jim.
Hi. We got hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Texans through their gaming activity funding all sorts of programs in Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, New Mexico. We have the courage to start talking about gaming in this state as a new revenue source.
But it took me I've only been in Texas for 27 years. It took me a while when I heard the word gaming to understand that what we actually meant was gambling, right?
It is.
Gaming is the nice way to say it.
Either way.
Gambling. Mr. Springer, will this be a topic of conversation?
You know, I have not heard it as a big topic of conversation. I've heard some studies. You know, yes, does it raise revenue? Does it also increase social costs? What are the trade-offs of it? I can tell you point blank, and I've made it crystal clear, the largest employer in my district is WinStar Casino. And they're not going to build the new casino in Gainesville. They're going to build it in Dallas. And I would lose hundreds and thousands of jobs, and I would see a collapse of my local economy. And I've made that one of the reasons I support Speaker Pro Tem Bonnen, caught myself there, is the fact that if I vote my district and it goes against me, I don't want to be held in penalty or timeout because I voted my district. And
that's a case in which by voting your district, you mean you would be opposed to...
I'd be opposed. I'm personally opposed to gambling because of my district.
Do either of you give it any chance of happening?
I mean, I would love for it to happen, but I don't think it happens. But I don't think it doesn't happen because of the House. I think it doesn't happen because of larger statewide issues.
Okay. Sir.
My question is primarily for Jeff Leach, although if Drew Springer wants to weigh in as well, that would be fine. During this recent speaker selection process through the Republican caucus, How much influence did Gordon Johnson wield, and how much influence do you expect him to wield over the caucus moving forward?
This is, of course, a great political insider question, but we have a room full of political insiders. There may actually be some people who know who Gordon Johnson is. Gordon Johnson was a close advisor to Speaker Strauss, was he not?
Mm-hmm. Putting it mildly.
Well, that's how I roll. I put it mildly. Mr. Leach.
None. I never heard from him. I don't think you heard from him. No member I talked to him. You know, the night that it became relatively clear a few weeks ago, pulling back the curtain a little bit, that there was tremendous momentum within the Republican caucus for Representative Bonnen. And let's be very clear, because I was on the working group of 5 Republican members that put in place those caucus rules to select our speaker nominee within our caucus, and that was not in any way to exclude or silence our Democrat members. That was we're tired.
Although it would have that practical effect.
That's not
it?
true.
No?
That's not true, because when it became clear that, with all due respect, that's not true, Evan. Because when it became clear, that Speaker Bonnen was likely going to get the majority of Republican caucus members, one of my first calls was to Mary González. And Drew, I know, picked up the phone and called Joe Moody and Mary and others. And so we wanted this to be a collaborative process. The purpose of those rule changes is to unite the Republican caucus. Look, I'll just be very clear. If Republicans keep fighting with each other, then this state is going to change very quickly, and Republicans are going to quickly be looking around saying, what happened?
Mrs. Olson.
I think that's an interesting concept. I think that people see it very binary, that either the Republican caucus is united and Democratic caucus is united, and we're not together. The Republican caucus can be united, and we can still be together. I don't think it's a either or.
Is that
right?
where you are?
That's right.
Are you both and now?
Yeah, I think it's both and. I think that, honestly, think about it. The Democratic caucus stayed together for months, and the majority of the Democratic caucus is on the Speaker Bonnen team, right? And so I don't think it's just, okay, Republicans are united or Democrats are united, so then we're separate. I think that we're both united because we all want to honestly do some good work this
And the
session.
Democrats that I spoke with were not comfortable with the idea of a group of 63 Democrats going and teaming with 12 Republicans and going to elect. Some of them may have liked it, but they wanted this to be a collaborative process, and I think that's what it was. Dennis Bonnen has met and talked with every single member. He's committed to flying to every single member's district, to meeting with them personally, meeting with their constituents. He's done that, and that's why I think it's going to be such a productive, healthy legislative
Mr.
session.
Springer, there was some criticism early on in Bonnen mania, before it was clear that he had the votes, that the orchestration of an effort to get behind Dennis Bonnen and to lock this up sort of invalidated or made irrelevant the December 1st meeting. That somehow there was all this effort, all this Sturm und Drang to put in a caucus vote, caused controversy in some quarters, and then here you are basically subverting that intent by locking it up prior to December 1st so that December 1st isn't even relevant. Do you have a point of view about that?
Absolutely. It was never intended that December 1st was going to be the first time we all got together and came in and started voting from, now 83 members. I get it right? 83, thank you. I keep so used to saying 95 sad day.
Life is hard.
I know. But to be able to come in and say,
That was a
we're
pretty sick burn.
going
That was
to
good.
get to, we're going to now have all 83 names on, and now let's start chipping one off at a time. That was always there as a backstop, as an insurance policy to make sure that we got to somebody before we got in.
So the idea of walking in with this basically done, everybody leaves their car running at the curb, let's vote, see you later.
I think if
There is
Chairman,
a UT
I think
game.
if Chairman Zerwas would have gotten the momentum in the first week after he announced, after the Speaker, or Phil King when he first announced, that it would have been over.
What time is the
and done at
caucus
that time.
meeting?
2:00.
So it's after the football game.
It's right in the middle of the football game.
I don't know who's playing.
Not the University
Mean
of North-
Green.
not the
Come on now.
University of North
Everybody
Texas.
knows. If you follow me, it's all about the Mean Green.
Adam, thanks for your question.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Angela Moore. I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I was very involved with Senator Ellis and others in developing public defender programs. I was the chief in San Antonio for several years. I left because of the Commissioner's Court stealing money. That's another issue.
Okay.
But my point here, and Representative Leach, that was so refreshing what you said, is that pro-life means not only in the uterus, but afterwards. I was a prosecutor for 15 years, federal and state. So I've done the whole thing, and I teach at St. Mary's School of Law. And the only way we are going to make reform is to remove some of these archaic, draconian rules when people have served their debt.
Let me ask you to just make this into a question. What would you like him to answer?
Okay?
Yeah.
Real quickly. One is juvenile life without parole. I have 2 clients I'm taking all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court because it is so absurd for someone who has committed an offense at 14 or 15, one of mine is a Katrina victim, to be put away for life.
Is that on your radar
warehouse.
screen as a possible component of reform?
No, it absolutely is. We've gotten into this mindset that we need to jail people that we're mad at instead of those that we're scared of. And let me be very clear. Another aspect of this is the death penalty, which I know you have aspect. Let me be very clear. There are men and women, I know of men specifically, on death row right now who are innocent.
I agree.
And that's a problem. And none of us, Republicans or Democrats, should stand quietly by and allow the state to execute those men knowing that they're innocent,
So
that
what's
they
the
didn't kill
solution,
someone.
Mr. Leach?
We're considering strongly what the solution should be.
Is
But
it
I'm not
Is it a
afraid.
moratorium?
I'm not afraid of the death penalty issue, nor should any legislator be. I've been to death row and
As have I.
have met with those men myself, and it is no joke. There is no more powerful exercise of government control over your life, over a Texan's life, than when you're locked away in solitary confinement for 23 and a half hours a day waiting for a needle to be put in your arms. Now, look, some of those men deserve, in my opinion, and in the opinion of the vast majority of Texans, to be put to death and held responsible for their crimes. But when we have men who are there, innocent men who are there on death row awaiting their execution dates, that's the problem.
So you will entertain a moratorium while we get this system fixed?
I will consider it.
Okay. Well, you
I will.
actually answer. I'll appreciate you for answering the question. That's good.
And
That's
if
good.
I understand what you're saying correctly, part of it is statutory.
Yes.
Working on the statutes regarding juvenile justice, death penalty, and lastly, expunction.
Yeah, I've got to go to the next question. All right,
Okay.
please
Yeah,
forgive me.
thank
I'm sorry.
you.
In the interest of time, ma'am. Last question. Yes.
Transportation category.
What's that again?
Transportation category.
Transportation category.
Yes, sir. Rideshare, Uber, and Lyft have been given a place where there are no regulations put in place. At the airport, they were given a lobby and a parking place.
Right.
You can check Austin Police Department where they're having to go out there because rideshare transportation companies are running drugs, weapons.
Let me ask what's your question?
fighting. Why are you considering bringing rideshare transportations into legislature and putting some sort of regulations?
Mr. Springer, did we not just have that happen?
We did, look, there's all sorts of mechanisms. I'm sure that some people are running drugs on limes and birds today, not
Well,
me, even though I was on one.
They're certainly driving it as if they are. I mean, that's
Yeah, but look, I think we have laws in place to deal with drug runners, serial rapists, all those other things. I think we have laws to deal with that. I just don't think that they fall into the realm of the transportation companies having to also become a police department for their own employees. We don't do that with the airline industries, to hold the airlines to say, you've got to start arresting, your pilots or stewardesses doing the same things, or flight attendants.
Well, I beg your pardon,
Lem-
sir,
let me-
but the city code does regulate taxi cab drivers.
Ma'am, I appreciate your question and the issue, truly do. Thank you. I'm just going to take one very last quick question.
Thank you, Evan.
Yes.
Last year, Speaker Strauss played a huge role in killing the bathroom bill. He said, sometimes the most conservative solution is for the government not to take action that isn't necessary. So, as I've heard today, apparently we have real important issues to deal with, like criminal justice reform, education, and football games. So this session...
Yes. We didn't talk about the Larson bill, but we should.
So this session, do you think Bonnen, who did sign on to the bathroom bill, will allow any form of it to go forward? One, like, as I said, his predecessor helped.
Would not.
kill.
Okay, make it a game show Speed round, yes or no. Bathroom bill comes back as a live issue, yes or no?
No.
Mr. Leach?
I'm sitting right here.
Come on, Mr. Leach.
Over the past over the past 18 months, as I've visited with thousands of constituents, teachers, law enforcement, parents, pastors, and fellow legislators, do you know how many people have said that the bathroom bill is a priority to them?
So
So
no.
the answer is no.
We have to come focus on the priorities of Texas.
Mr. Springer?
I agree with Jeff. We got to focus on the priorities of Texas.
I like ending on areas of agreement. I don't know about you, but I feel significantly more informed about the Bonnen administration as a result of these whisperers. Please thank Representatives González, Leach, and Springer